You have amazing stuff. You don't have good stuff. You have amazing stuff. I can't fit all of this into one video.
Well, this is news to me.
Chris, there is an NES game that you brought that I didn't feature in this time, and it's this one right here. This is Dragon Warrior 3. If you want to know how much this is worth and what else Chris brought, there's a lot more stuff, and each video from here on out gets a little spicier and a little spicier. Ready to do this one more time?
Yeah.
Let's do this 2 more times. Welcome back to part 2 of Chris's amazing lot of video games. This is where we get into, I'm going to call them the banger titles. And these are games that are some of the most desirable games for their systems, and some stuff that I've literally never seen before. People are going to think I'm making this stuff up because I say that in almost all of these videos, but really, it's crazy what my friends have. And you brought that today.
Ta-da.
So who are you?
My name's Christopher, and I'm a musician, and I have a music project called Life is My Soundtrack, and you should listen to it because you'll like it.
Which is great. It's instrumental music that is those 10, 15-minute long songs, really relaxing. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a bunch of items, and then I'm going to give you some options on what to do with all of it at the end. You can decide what you want to do with it, where you want to go with it, but in the last video, you were saying that you're thinking of maybe selling some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have time, or do you play games very much anymore?
I don't play games as much as I'd like to. I like them. I still watch videos on them. I watch documentaries on them. I watch long plays of them. Anything I can get. Shout out to the Basement Brothers for the Neo Geo series also.
Interesting you'd mention Neo Geo. Let's start where we left off last time, which is you had this, Dragon Warrior 3 on the NES. How did you end up with this game?
I do not recall how I ended up with that game.
Do you know much about it?
I remember playing it. I remember Dragon Warrior 1 a lot.
Yeah.
I played the daylights out of that game.
You can buy remastered on the Switch for a couple of bucks, but if you want to play this original NES version, take a guess on about how much this goes for.
I don't know.
You're looking at about $100.
No.
When you look at the categories of video games, there's essentially a few different categories. There's your common games like your Marios, your Zeldas. Those games are worth money because they're just some of the most exciting games on their respective systems. But then there's these role-playing games, and role-playing games generally have a little bit of a smaller print run. Their fan base is really devoted. There can be quite literally dozens, if not hundreds of hours in some of these games, and so even though you're paying a lot more money for them, you're arguably getting more value for the dollar for how much more game time is in them. The stories and the adventures are more epic. Maybe some of the obscurity, the popularity of the franchise today is why it goes for about $100.
Wow.
So throw that in the calculator. Next up is a franchise that, for the life of me, I don't understand why it has sold so much and yet is still so valuable. And you have an authentic copy of Pokemon Red. It's in near perfect condition. Original authentic copies of this game are hard to find because so many reproductions have been made.
Really?
These are really easy to reproduce. You have to find, there's a few signs of what makes them authentic. Yours is clearly authentic, and for that reason, it's worth $60. We're going to focus a lot of this now on the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance is essentially Super Nintendo in hand. I know you have the SP console, and you have the regular Game Boy Advance as well. How do I say this? You don't have any of the commons, you don't have the pet games, or any. You only have great games in your collection. Most of them you have the manual for, and arguably the best manuals. Some of these manuals can sometimes sell for $40, $50 based on the manual.
Wow.
Yeah, and you've got a couple of those. We're going to base all the values on cartridge only, and then once we're done, we'll add up the value of the manuals. First one you have here is Dragon Ball Z, The Legacy of Goku. It's about a $12 game. Final Fantasy 1 and 2, Dawn of Souls. You've got this one at $25. Super Mario World, Super Mario Advance 2. This is interesting because you have a manual for it, but you also have this, I think it's an insert. I didn't even know this existed. It looks like kind of like a map or something. What do you open this up?
I don't know that I've ever opened it.
I'm scared to
It is a map.
the world map.
On the back, it's got some information about some of the bad guys.
Literally no creases, completely perfect condition. This game cartridge by itself is worth about $25. Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, this is $30, and this one does have the manual in perfect condition. Super Ghouls and Ghosts, this one, the label has a slight amount of wear on it. I mean, it's a slight scratch in the middle, and also the manual for this one. Cartridge alone is $50 to $60. Prices are everywhere on this. I saw really low prices and then higher than $60 on it as well. I think $60 in this condition is fair. Next one you have is Street Fighter Alpha 3. Also with the manual. This is the most perfect label I've seen so far. Like just mint condition. If only you had the manual. If only you had the manual for Mega Man Battle Network 2. This is a hard one for me to price because when I looked through it, I saw stuff like as low as $30, $35, but then there's 3 sold separate listings for $80. I'm wondering if you even ever played this game. One of the most desired games on the Game Boy Advance. This is probably the cleanest I've ever seen this label ever. Metroid Zero Mission. Having labels this clean, I mean, you could argue that it's worth more than what I'm saying is the top dollar on eBay. I don't know that I would nickel and dime that hard on it for people. I want people to be like, sweet, I got a perfect edition one, but people might buy this and go, is this a reproduction? Because it's in that mint condition. This is an $85 game. And this is a game that I want for my collection, but Chris, I don't know if I can afford it because the sold listings on this are anywhere from $90 to $120, considering that your label is, again, in mint condition. Metal Slug Advance, like mint, perfect condition. And the manual. I don't know if you ever opened this manual. A lot of Game Boy Advance games get beat up because they're portable games. People drop them in the car. These games, no. Hardly a scratch on any of them. But you guys were just getting started. Chris? The Game Boy Advance was a Super Nintendo in hand, but a lot of us who owned GameCubes wanted to play it at home, and there was a way to do that. Why don't you go ahead and pull up your GameCube real quick, the console there. At the bottom of the GameCube console, and you'll sometimes see these at the swap meets or pawn shops or game stores, there's this little piece. It just detaches and attaches on. This slot fits Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. This little piece on the bottom is worth about $50. But did you know that this piece does not work by itself? You need something to make it work, and you have it. It is the Game Boy Player disc. And this thing, you have, with the manual, complete inbox. Your disc is ooh, this is interesting. This is something about GameCube games. This is really tough. If you look at this label, it's hard to kind of tell, but there's a little bit of crinkling on it. And this happened to a lot of GameCube games. This crinkling may mean that this does not work. The bottom of it is essentially scratch-free. There's nothing on the bottom of this that indicates in any way, shape, or form that it wouldn't work. However, if the top layer is peeling, cracked, or broken, it may not work. Now, I would say even with this case, even because it has the manual, and even with this bottom piece, you're still looking at some value. However, if this disc in this condition, if I brought this to a show, people would want to make sure that it works perfectly, and they'd want to test it. But even then, I don't know how much longer it would work for. If this were in perfect shape, you're looking at $200. Wow. The disc alone goes for about $150, especially with all the casing and all that stuff. With the bottom piece, so it's like $150 and $50. But in this condition, it's a real toss-up. I couldn't offer you much on this. I'd basically be paying for the slip cover, the case, and the manual. The disc itself, I don't know if I'd even be comfortable selling it.
Sure.
I'd probably put that up on eBay if I sold it, and I would just do it as an auction and let people determine the value of it. Someone might be willing to take the risk. It could work for a couple of months and break. It could work for 10 years and be no problem. I would say probably between the two things, I'd probably say $75 for these two. That's a tough one to tell, but with optical discs, they just have more problems than other stuff. What do you think about all this Game Boy Advance stuff and how valuable these games are?
That's very surprising to me.
Yeah, in what way?
It was a lot of fun to play, but it's just interesting. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Let me think for a sec.
You don't just have Game Boy Advance games, common games, good games. You have like the best of the best games. These are all games that when people are looking for games for their collection, these are the first big ones that they want to get. These are the ones that people are willing to spend a little extra money on because they're from the best franchises. They might be harder to find, but I mean, they're Street Fighter, Mega Man, Metroid, Mario, Zelda. Like all of that stuff is the stuff that collectors really just want and that they're willing to pony up for because those are the best experiences you can get. And a lot of collectors will go out of their way to buy and maybe even upgrade their destroyed labels or even their slightly messy labels, especially when they're in that mint of condition. So you took great care of your stuff, but you also have great taste in games, which is pretty cool.
There was a lot of awesome games. I mean, and it seemed like on Game Boy Advance, a lot of the games that were like maybe on Super Nintendo, but maybe it's a little different. Like Ghouls and Ghosts had different branching paths. They changed up a little bit, so I mean, it was stuff that was already awesome.
So let's get into some of your more interesting games. I'm going to start with Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube. This is one of the best games ever made, especially...
Still good.
Yeah. Have you played it on the Nintendo Wii?
I have not played it on the Wii, but I have it on the Oculus.
I've heard that playing it on the Oculus is the definitive way to play the game now.
It's cool, but the GameCube's still so good. when it came out, I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah, no one had. It did something really interesting for the Resident Evil franchise because it took what was ordinarily a very slow, very tension-filled game, and it just turned it on its head with a lot of action and horrifying elements. This is a mint condition copy. The discs are in perfect shape. This is worth about $40. This is the game that took Resident Evil from this game's incredible to this is one of the best series of all time, is Resident Evil 2. You have the PS1 version here. It has this DualShock variant cover here on the label, which not all of them had that. Your discs, again, it looks like you never played your game, but I know that you did. The manual has a little bit of, I want to say, moisture kind of wear to it or whatever here, but really, really amazing shape. I'm seeing sold listings on this particular variant for about $70. I think $70 easy because it's in mint condition. This is something I've literally never seen before.
Really?
This is the Resident Evil 4 preview disc. This has a playable demo of Resident Evil 4. I don't know anything about this. It looks like it has some previews of other Resident Evil games. It doesn't look like there's a manual that came with it.
It didn't come with a manual. I got this by reserving the game at South Coast Plaza at Software Etc. And I had to put down like $5 on the game, and I got this. And it plays from the beginning of the game until the bell rings after the first village battle, and then that's the end.
Yeah, I have to have this.
Nice.
I'm seeing this one go for about $40 to $60 for a demo disc. I would say easily $60 again because it's in just mint condition.
Wow.
All right, and the most pricey game that you have. Brave Fencer Musashi. Do you remember this one?
I remember it. It's surprising that it's the most expensive.
Why does that surprise you?
It was a fun game, but it didn't change the world.
You have what some of these copies don't, which is you have the collector CD, which this demo disc is in it. A lot of times people will sell this with just the game and the manual and the case, but they won't have that. The disc and the case have a little bit of wear, more so than your other stuff. Nothing of substantial amount, but I would still value this at $150.
No.
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah. So there's a couple reasons why. Squaresoft in the PS1 era was just hard to beat. All of the stuff that they put out, at worst was mediocre, at best was the defining games of that generation. You know, Final Fantasy VII, I know in the Final Fantasy fan base is not the one that everyone looks back at the most fondly, but even if you didn't like role-playing games, you played that one. The Squaresoft look, the way that the characters looked, the way that the games were designed, the role-playing elements, even the cases and the way that they look, there's such a similarity to them all, is so cool and is so identifiable. Brave Fencer Musashi is more of an action role-playing game. It's a fun game. A little outdated by today's standards, but for the charm of the 90s-ish era, it's a real fun game. You guys, that's not it. It's not even close to it. Chris, you've mentioned this company a few times since we've been hanging out here today. I don't want to oversell this, but this is one of the most collectible things in all of retro gaming. You have two of these. So do you know what MVS and AES is?
I do.
Educate the people.
So the MVS was the Neo Geo system that was in the arcades.
Right.
It used changeable cartridges.
Yep.
And
that saved, if you owned an arcade, rather than getting new machines, you could put in the games, change the marquee.
Yep.
And it was cost effective and really cool.
Absolutely. And then the AES was the home version of the arcade games, and the games were about the size of videotapes.
Yeah.
They were at the time when they came out, it was around $200 a game, and the system was something like $650. It was the holy grail.
They started at about $250 a game. And the system, you could only initially rent it. You couldn't actually buy it.
I remember it. I remember it being for rent, and then the gold system came out, and it had a pack-in with Magician Lord, and I wanted that so bad.
Hardcore collectors will go for the AES games wherever they can find them because they're just so rare. Not everyone could spend $250 on a single game back then. Not everyone can spend $250 on a single game now. But those games have not stayed at that amount. You have two Neo Geo AES games. Let's bring up the bottom one there first. This is Blues Journey.
I do not have the manuals.
Okay.
But I did not get them with the manuals, or I still would have them.
Chris, how did you find these?
I found these at the swap meet a long time ago, in a box, randomly. I didn't have a Neo Geo, but I had to buy them. And it weighs A lot.
I don't know anything about this game. What do you know about this game?
This game is a lot kind of like Mario Brothers. It's kind of similar to Super Mario Brothers. It's an action platformer. It's super colorful. It's just fun, good music. If you want to know more about that, watch the Basement Brothers. Again, I'm telling you, I watch these videos all the time. They do an amazing retrospective on this game, and they're cataloging every Neo Geo game ever made.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Based on comparable solds, I think you're looking at about $250 for just the one game. Do you remember what you paid for it at the swap meet?
$5 maybe, something like that.
The
Something
swap
like
meets,
that.
man.
It was really, it was just cheap.
This is NOM 1975. This one, let's see, also
Same owner.
No manual. The plastic here is a little bit ripped and bent on the edge, as you can see there. Software, etc. The original sticker, the price is like kind of scratched out. I would guess that you're looking at $250. The thing is, I'm going to quote these prices really loosely.
Sure.
I could be way off on these. And based on your options of what you decide to do, I would give you a quote now, but I would cross-reference it up and down with a couple of Neo Geo experts to make sure that I'm offering you the fair amount. It's like seeing, like a magical item. You heard it exists, but there it is for real. I never see these. And when I do, they're behind a locked cage at a retro game shop because they're worth so much money. You got it for $5 at the swap meet.
I did. One thing I noticed about this is the uncensored cover. You guys can see there's a woman who is, I guess, kind of scantily clad, or she was considered scantily clad. And several versions of the game, the variant, it's like it has a black box around it, so you can't see her. I know that. I don't know what that does to the value or not.
I don't either.
Just a piece of trivia for you.
But it's wild to me that these games had variants to them, given how rare they are. I wouldn't think they printed enough to go, hey, on the second printing, we need to change the cover. So you've got really a couple of different options here in front of you. Let's talk about what those are. And I mentioned it before, this is going to be a repeat to anyone in the audience. Skip to this point if you want to just get to the end and see what Chris wants to do here. First thing you can do is some of this stuff is just super collectible and fun. These games are really easy to play. I noticed you have a PS2 console still. You can still play these PS1 games there. You have a GameCube, you can still go back to it and play the original way to play Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube. I mean, anyone having an AES game in their collection is a real sort of centerpiece of a lot of collections. And so if you just want to keep this stuff, you're sitting on $1,700 worth of the best in a collection. Though there may be a lot of other ways to play these games, having the original physical cartridge, it's just hard to beat that experience. Option number 2 is a pawn shop. They're all so different. I couldn't possibly predict. I always put pawn shops at the bottom end of this value estimation list. I could be wrong. Some pawn shops could be really in the know on this and give you the top dollar amount. Others of them might just give blanket amounts. I haven't dealt too much with pawn shops. Your mileage may vary on where you go and what you decide to do. The next one up is a game store. Most game stores have values that are preset. They've got a general idea of what they know that they'll pay. They usually reference databases. Some of them will actually go through and look up the eBay prices right there before they buy stuff. But because you have such high quality items, I would think that a game store would really want to get these. And so most game stores will give you somewhere between 35 and maybe 50% the value cash to trade, somewhere in that range. If you want to get a new PS5 and a few games, you could trade this stuff for that. Obviously, value-wise over time, this retro stuff's only going to get more expensive or flatten out, and that stuff's only going to get less expensive. But you may not care. I mean, life is short. The games are about playing, not sitting on a shelf. Anyway, the others you could sell to me. This is all so desirable. If I brought this to an event, to a gaming expo or a buy-sell trade event, I bet that I would get offers on all of this stuff right away. So with that, I would easily give you 60% the value on everything. I would, no questions. Cash right now, done. I would love to have a couple of these items for my collection, probably some of the Game Boy Advance games I would keep, and the rest of it I would turn around and sell, pocket a few bucks, and then maybe hook up a few other collectors with this stuff too. The other option is eBay. eBay is great. You're going to get 80 to 85% the value. Some people might spend more on some of this stuff, some people might spend less on some of this stuff, but because your stuff's in mint condition, even though the current listings say that it was sold for $50, someone might give you $60 because it's in such great shape, but you're still going to have to take out 15 to 20% for fees. You may be covering shipping, you may not be covering shipping, packaging, supplies, time. People really underestimate it takes a lot of time to go through all this stuff, to list it, to take pictures, to deal with customers, deal with offers, all that kind of fun stuff. There's just a lot that can go into it, which may not be a big deal. A lot might be 10 minutes of your time. It might be 30 minutes of your time. Someone also might try and rip you off. I mean, not a lot of these games, copies of these games show up a lot. But I wouldn't let that scare you off either. There's a lot of really good things that can come of it. It just might be more stress than you really want to deal with. The other one is to really maximize your value. An in-person sale or trade is going to be the best way to do it. So that's OfferUp. That's Facebook Marketplace. You can set the price. I would say on the Neo Geo AES games, you're probably going to negotiate with someone because a real enthusiast is going to want this stuff. But the Game Boy Advance stuff, I would hold real firm on the prices because they're in just such perfect shape. You can also go to Facebook collectors groups. Now, in your case, with the AES games, if you wanted to get rid of them, I would probably try and find an AES Facebook group and say, I came across these. This is about what I'm looking for them. Let me know if you're interested. And you might have someone try to negotiate with you there. The cool thing is, since you got it so cheap, if you want to give someone a pretty good deal and give them a discount, I mean, don't give away this stuff, or give it away. It's up to you. You can also give all this stuff away. And also, I should say, you can do a combination of these items. You know, you can take some of this stuff that would be hard to sell to one location. You can sell in person for the other stuff. You can keep some of the stuff. But if you had to pick one option right now, Chris, what would you do?
If I had to pick one option right now, I would probably sell to you.
Wow. For real. Okay, we didn't talk about this beforehand. Now, why would you sell to me?
You've been a good friend to me for a lot of years. This is something that you love. This is something that can help you make a little bit of money. This is something you can get to other people that they can enjoy. Those things appeal to me.
Yeah.
And then also just trying to go through the trouble of selling everything and listing things one at a time can be very, very overwhelming. That's a little bit of a negative to me personally.
Okay. Now, you should know... No one who ever comes in here is ever pressured to do anything. Should you decide to buy to sell all this stuff to me, I'd be very grateful. But I want to make sure that you know what all of your options are, and that but you're an adult. You can do whatever you want with your time, with your money, and who am I to tell you what to do? I'm curious to see what will happen next.
Me too.
Now, Chris, there's going to be a part 3 to this series, because you brought over a copy of the game, Star Wars Rogue Leader, but it's sealed. Chris, is this the only sealed game that you brought with you?
It is not the only sealed game I brought with me.
Tune in next time to see the sealed games that Chris brought with him to the garage, and you're going to want to tune in. I'll see you then. While many of us have items of value hidden away in that old box of childhood games or toys, the odds of us having something newsworthy are quite low and dependent on a number of complex factors. And yet, whatever the monetary value may be of those childhood items, nothing is more valuable than the joy that comes from the memories they leave with us. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.